Great. After some technical difficulties, as it's supposed to be for an academic conference, I'm Tobias Fiebig, and you might know me from other fun research, like if you don't take a feminist stance on system operations, you can forget about IT security. And we are all going down in climate change, and we're hurt all the time. So today we are talking about heads in the clouds, or universities' migrations to public infrastructures. Well, public cloud infrastructures. A little bit of terminology, cloudification. So clouds are for us digital infrastructure which is run in a multi-tenant setup, rented out by one single provider where customers do not own the infrastructure, and there are several levels of administration which are taken over by that service provider, and you can do like this rapid scaling and dynamic self-servicing. Cloudification means this progressing centralization of all digital services in the hands of but a few large companies. You can get these clouds in various service models. You can have infrastructure as a service where you're basically getting some virtual machines. You can have a platform as a service, PaaS, where the cloud is running your service, and then you also have SaaS, software as a service, where you basically just get a web service. So if we're talking about IT in universities, how did it used to be? Well, it used to be like this. We had our, IT department, we had our server rooms, we had our servers. This is a Beowulf cluster of McGill University, which has been used by the Astrophysics group to look at binary pulsars. And how is it going? Well, it is going like this. We're moving more and more of a university IT, even for privacy conferences, and please don't take this as me dunking on people. I very much see this as the effect of a complex system behaving in a specific way and not the fault of people. Moving to clouds, SharePoint in this case. Of course, the interesting question is like, how much do we do that? And we set out to measure, by the way, together with Martina Lindorfer sitting over there. And we use DNS for that. DNS is this very fun thing which makes a name become, for example, an IP address. It's basically a system which can map one identifier to another. It is happily organized as a tree. We all know example.com, or the domain of our university. The tree starts at the root. Then we have the top-level domains like .com or .net. And below that, we have second-level domains, and so on and so on and so on. If we want to resolve such a name to an address or another identifier, we do something which is called DNS recursion, which is done by our local DNS recursors. At home, it's usually like your little CPE box you got from your provider. And what that basically does is it traverses through that tree, starting at the servers responsible for the root, to figure out like what the identifier is mapped to. Here comes in something called the Farsight dataset, which collects these DNS queries from DNS recursors all around the world. There are precautions taken that there's no PII included and no individual client IPs, and it's also doing some additional cleaning to scrub that out. But what that gives us in the end is a basically global view on what is put into the DNS, what names are there. So we use that to look at what names are below university's domain. We did that for Austria, the Netherlands, France, the Times Higher Education Top 100, Germany, the United Kingdom, Switzerland, we are there yet, and the United States. And we looked at various types of cloud usage, so general cloud use. Do they have any name under their domain, which is pointing to the address space of one of the major cloud providers? What video conferencing tools are they using? What are they doing for email? And we also took a little bit of a peek at self-hosted services. So, starting with the first one. So for Amazon, Microsoft, and Google use in general, we wondered if there is any name under a university's domain pointing to them, which basically, as in this example, we have brightspace.todelft.nl, which is a CNAME, so a reference to another DNS entry, which is todelft.brightspace.com, and that then ultimately points to IP addresses, and those two IP addresses are actually announced by Amazon. The great thing about the Farsight dataset is that it is historic, so we can do that actually back into the past, starting from 2015. And this is what we got. So we have basically everything that involves Amazon in some way is bluish. And then we have Microsoft in red and Google in yellowish. And what we see is basically two clusters. On the left, we have Austria, France, Germany, and Switzerland, and they are a little bit more reserved when it comes to cloud use, even though, especially in Switzerland, you see it picking up. And on the right, we have the Netherlands, Times Higher Education Top 100, United Kingdom, United States, which are pretty much all in. So for the Netherlands and the United States, for example, it's basically every university at least has one service running on one of these clouds. And especially in the United States, a lot of that stuff is, with all three of them. Fun thing to note, by the way, we did some comments from the reviewers suggesting we refine our methodology, and for that we are actually very thankful because we got a second paper out of it in a measurement conference introducing that methodology, and that allowed us to see this really interesting spike here in the United Kingdom, which kind of correlates with events, and we are not sure what it was, but with the inclusion of Amazon in the UK's procurement data thingy for public service. Great, next, Zoom. We all know this as Zoomification, so we try to find out if there are names that match the Zoom naming scheme for their customers under zoom.us, and of course also for WebEx and Adobe, or if there's these authentication tokens in DNS for a university indicating that they're using that domain. Same story there. We can see that there's a lot of cloudification. There are basically two very interesting things. Of course, we see that on the left, also like our cloud critical universities, there is somewhat, well, a pandemic effect, right? So COVID kicked this off. And on the right, the US has been Zoomified long before the pandemic, so it was an ongoing process. And B, on the right, we also see a lot more Skype for business use, which overlaps with Teams use. And, well, that might be because there's more centralization in those universities. Then we have email, and there we basically check whether the mail exchange records, so the records with which you indicate who receives your email, are pointing to one of the cloud providers, or if you are using Proofpoint on-site but then upload attachments into the cloud. Again, we have a similar pattern. On the left, a lot more reservation about cloud use, even though Austria is picking up a little bit, and also Switzerland. And there's a very fun thing in the Netherlands here. So there's this increase in 2019-ish. And we could actually tie that to a letter from the Minister of Interior who said, like, hey, we talked to those Microsoft people, really nice people. They pinky promised us not to invade your privacy, so it's all fine for Dutch government agencies to use those cloud services now. And the universities were like, great. We found blog articles with a university being like, great, we waited for this, we're going for it now. 365. Which brings us to doing it yourself. For that, we looked not only at Big Blue Button, but here we are talking about Big Blue Button. What we did there is we looked for names that are somehow related to Big Blue Button or any of its service components. And there we kind of found an inverse picture. So especially in Germany, there's like a huge pandemic effect for Big Blue Button. And talking to operators in Germany, we saw that their current, more self-hosting focused approach allowed them to quickly react to the pandemic and roll out infrastructure to support teaching quite quickly. There's a little bit in France, and in French, they name their things often a little bit different, so it's relatively hard to find Big Blue Button setups there because they don't call it Big Blue Button, they call it video conferencing system, but French. Austria, there's a little bit, and then, well, on the other side, there's not that much Big Blue Button, especially in the US and the UK. Question now is, what could go wrong? Well, this. By the way, another paper we got out of this, looking at privacy policies. If you have such a convoluted setup using a lot of external infrastructure, you might end up doing this. And if you wonder this, well, this is what I mean. Universities' privacy policies become relatively vague because they have to cover a lot. And, well, then we end up with a situation where you basically cannot verify the privacy policy anymore or cannot understand it because it's just too generic. Another thing is these dependency relationships. I mean, we have seen that GitHub has been restricting Iranian users from their platform, partially also if these work in US companies. The same thing could happen to us as universities. If we're using Microsoft authentication, Microsoft is like, hey, we got to enforce sanctions now. We're kind of out of luck. Then we are basically in a situation where we have to say, like, do we continue using Office 365, or do we as a university keep authority over whom we are admitting to our university? Because honestly, if you can't use the university services in modern times, you're basically unable to study at a university. And there's also this little matter of academic freedom. Because by relying on cloud infrastructure, universities become somewhat dependent. And often the argument for cloud is like cost savings. And these cost savings are usually realized by reducing capabilities, your local staff. And think about, we are interested in good business relationships with our customers, but that paper doesn't look like good business relationships. Maybe rethink publishing it. And it's not like they didn't do these things. I mean, there was the incident about Zoom taking a stance about a seminar at several US universities. Somewhat related, the European Parliament, Patrick Bayer noticed that Microsoft is running the spam filter for that. I think Martina can tell you interesting stories about the fun you can have with Microsoft spam filters and how it might inflict on your academic freedom or participation in conferences. And of course, there's a classic case of Facebook shutting down user accounts of people who are doing a bit too much Facebook research. Ultimately, we basically have been there before, right? The oil and gas industry has been doing that. They spent billions to play down climate crisis, and I mean, it's usually pretty hot in Lausanne, but I think this week has been the hottest on the planet so far, at least in recorded history. They also did that before in the context of lead, well, what we have here on the your right. Remember leaded gasoline? It is basically what subjected a whole generation to too much lead in their bloodstream, and they spent a lot of time and energy to hinder the researcher who was just trying to figure out how old the world is from actually fighting against lead in the environment. And have you heard about Contagan? Similar thing. If we are dependent on a company, that company will feel enticed to protect their interest, and if those conflict, well, we might get into a dicey situation. In any case, in the end, the question is not if they would actually do that, and in my opinion, they will. The question is whether we as universities, with our public duty of providing independent research, want to get into a situation where they could do that. And with that, happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much for your talk. We have a lot of interest. We have a current count around 9 questions and about 2 minutes to get through them. So we're not going to do that.
I'll be online later, so.
So you'll be able to answer lots of those questions online. A couple that we'll start with now, though, is from Christine. Regarding the steep increase of use of video conferencing systems in Germany from 2020, do you have an explanation for why you didn't observe similar steep increases in other countries?
Come again?
So the steep increase of video usage in Germany in 2020, you saw that there, but not in other countries.
Oh, the big blue button use.
Yeah, do you have an explanation for why it happened there?
There's a very tightly knit operator community in German universities. There's still a lot more self-hosting, even though things are crumbling, and we're currently running a follow-up study to investigate why universities move to the cloud, and also to get a better hang of these communities and how that inflicts on adoption of self-hosting. But the bottom line basically is those are often structures that have grown for decades. If you tear them down, they are gone and you can't get them back easily, not even with money. They still have them, so they could leverage them. If you don't, well.
Thanks. Another question from Carl. Have you ever observed any drop of usage of cloud services?
Not in our data.
After regulations like GDPR?
Not in our data.
And one more from Sumanth. Sumanth is wondering if you've reapplied your methodologies for cloud use to other domains besides .edu, like if you try to do this with .com, to see if there's a similar adoption of cloud services post-pandemic in commercial companies rather than education.
We partially looked at some things. We didn't do it in a structured way. It could be relatively trivially done with the existing tool chain.
Christine was also wondering, you had a quote at the end about good business relationships, and is this something somebody said in your study, or was this a hypothetical? Can you talk through the context for that?
So the context is clearly what has been done, for example, in the context of LED. It is what has been done with Zoom, who said, like, well, you can do the seminar, but not with this speaker or not on our platform.
So it wasn't an explicit quote from a participant or anything?
This is a quantitative study.
Okay. Thank you. And I think at this point we're out of time, but thank you so much for answering questions. And thank you very much to the audience for